Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to all. For those who are connecting in a different time zone, good afternoon or good evening. So welcome to this event, a Coherent Policy and Action for Better Nutrition segment of the Rome Nutrition Week. My name is Oliver Oliveros. I'm the Executive Coordinator of the Agroecology Coalition, and I'm here together with.
Hello, my name is Anna Horner. I'm the coordinator of UN Nutrition. Pleasure to be here with you all today.
Well, warm welcome again to this event, which is jointly co-organized by the Agroecology Coalition and the Healthy Diets for Sustainable Food Systems Coalition. This side event is really focusing on enhancing policy coherence towards delivering healthy diets from sustainable food systems through agroecological practices.
So before we get started, I'd just like to come in on a few housekeeping matters. We have a number of colleagues online. I wanted to say that we do have a question and answer box, so feel free to pose any questions that you have in that box. And likewise, we'll be taking questions from the crowd, of course. We have simultaneous interpretation in French and Spanish for this event, so feel free online to access that. And in the room, you have headsets for whatever language you'd like to listen to. And I also wanted to let you know that we will be recording this event and it will be listed on the UN Nutrition website after the event. So with that, I think we can get started. So as you know, our current food systems face major environmental, climate, and health challenges. We know that more than 2 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet today, and the global nutrition targets are not on track to be met. At the same time, we have made some progress. Since the beginning of the UN Decade on Nutrition, progress has been made in terms of knowledge and raising awareness on nutrition. We now speak, for example, about the true costs of food, which we did not do, say, 9 years ago. We have exposed socio-environmental damages and unsustainable value chains, and we have demonstrated the benefits of agroecology on these aspects of nutrition.
And on the policy or political side, countries have negotiated and adopted the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health at the Convention on Biological Diversity COP16 in Cali in October last year.
And similarly, just a few months ago at the 2025 Nutrition for Growth Summit in Paris, we saw an increase in pledges for funding for nutrition compared to the Tokyo event, which was held in 2021. Indeed, we were able to have $28 billion pledged for nutrition at the N4G Summit this year, which demonstrated a continued and growing awareness and interest for good nutrition among different stakeholders.
And from the scientific standpoint, several articles demonstrate the benefits of sustainable and agroecological food systems, nutrition linkage. And indeed, the principles and elements of agroecology constitute a holistic approach aiming to provide nutritious food with multiple co-benefits to climate, to biodiversity, to human and soil health. FAO's tool for agroecology performance evaluation, or TAPE, also highlights the benefits of agroecology when it comes to increased productivity and nutritious diets.
So in this session today, we will be hearing from representatives from government, civil society, academia, and philanthropy. We will highlight the role of agroecology in ensuring good nutrition and healthy diets while producing food sustainably.
All right, at this point, we want to see some participation from the audience, both in person and online. So those of you who have a phone, please put it out, and you will see a QR code in your screen. And we wanted to have a sense of who is in the room, virtually and in person. So you put out your phone, click that QR code, and enter the code 730127772 on the Mentimeter website. We wanted to know, where are you coming from, what stakeholder category you are from, so we would have a sense of the geographic and stakeholder diversity that we have in this room today. So we'll give you a few seconds. All right. Where are you coming from? From what region? Is it from Europe, from Asia, the Americas, etc.? Aha. Well, North Americans and Latin Americans show up. The Europeans are catching up. Africa is catching up, so we'll have a sense of how many people are in the room, in person and virtually. All right. Okay, so majority are probably coming from the European continent, although we could understand that some of those who are based in Europe are also probably from other regions and time zone-wise. Next question, to which stakeholder category do you belong to? Are you from the civil society groups, from government agencies, from the UN institutions, farmers' organizations, indigenous peoples, research, philanthropy, or from the private sector? So we're seeing a lot of UN agencies, international organizations are here, governments, civil society, research.
Private sector.
Ah, great. Private sector is here. We need you guys to come up and step up. Anna.
Okay, with that, we will pass over to our colleague from FAO who will be helping us to set the scene. I'd like to introduce Mr. Chikelo Mba, who is the Deputy Director of Plant Production and the Protection Division in FAO. So Mr. Mba, let me ask you just a quick question. Given that your division coordinates a range of policies, programs, and initiatives related to agroecology, how do you see agroecological practices contributing to healthier diets and to improve nutrition? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. I will answer that question by trying to situate it all in the overarching context of the work that we do. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct honor and pleasure for me to contribute some insights for this side event to the Rome Nutrition Week that is titled Enhancing Policy Coherence Towards Delivering Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems through Agroecological Practices. As has been mentioned, I belong to the Plant Production and Protection Division at FAO's headquarters here in Rome, and we coordinate the organization's work on agroecology. Ladies and gentlemen, even in these turbulent times, there are a few things for which there is widespread consensus. And these include the fact that far too many people are hungry. Far too many people are malnourished. Put in simple terms, this means that these people do not have access to healthy diets. And put another way, far too many people do not eat adequate quantities and quality of food to enable them lead productive, happy, and fulfilled lives. And I hope you do agree with me that this is both a loss to society at large and a sad indictment on our supposed civilization. Let me reiterate some of the points that have already been made for reasons of emphasis. Through the 2024 edition of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, that is SOFI 2024, we now know that 1/3 of people on planet Earth, about 2.8 billion, could not afford a healthy diet. Though here I'm mindful that I'm preaching to the converted, to the choir, I still invite you to let this sink in. 1 out of every 3 persons in the world were malnourished in 2022. Worse still, ladies and gentlemen, the same SOFI 2024 estimates that in low-income countries, this dire statistic plummeted to a staggering 71.5% of the population who could not afford a healthy diet. And it is projected in that same report that 6 years away from the 2030 deadline for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the prospects of achieving zero hunger, to put it mildly, are doubtful. In fact, to the contrary, ladies and gentlemen, it is projected that 582 million people will be chronically undernourished at the end of the decade. And more than half of those people will be in Africa. But, my dear friends and colleagues, it's not all doom and gloom at FAO. FAO's leadership and staff believe that these dire statistics are reversible. However, there is a caveat. Business as usual is not an option. And as some of us may already know, FAO uses its strategic framework 2022 to 31 as the template to work with members and partners to reverse these unconscionable statistics and thereby achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. For reasons of brevity, the strategic framework seeks to produce more with less, to produce more with less. And for the agroecology community of practice here, I believe that this resonates with you. Let me take a step back. I believe that I know why I, from the Plant Production and Protection Division of FAO, was requested to contribute to this scene setting. And I think it is because at least 80% of all foods are plant-based. A fact which underscores the critical role of my division, with all due modesty, plays in implementing the FAO strategic framework and hence working with members to achieve the SDGs. So, how do we in the Plant Production and Protection Division support this charge to produce more with less? Our work in the division enables farmers to transition to sustainable cropping systems that produce more with less through three main outcomes. One, farmers cultivate better crop varieties through enhanced access to the quality seeds and planting materials of the crop varieties that are most suitable to their production systems and needs. And typically, these crop varieties are productive, they're nutritious, and are resistant to biotic and abiotic stresses. Two, farmers implement better cropping systems. That is, good agronomic practices, for instance, relating to how soil fertility, soil moisture is managed, how land is prepared, and of course, through the use of sustainable mechanization. And the third pillar is that farmers manage plant health. Integrated pest management, or IPM, is used to reduce the impacts of pests and diseases to below economic thresholds. Now, the nutrition-related outcomes of the work that we do are achieved in two main ways. One is increased cultivation and hence availability of nutrient-dense crops and varieties. Two, diversified cropping systems, which is enabled by a wide spectrum of well-adapted crops and varieties, rather than the big nine crops that account for over 60% of dietary calorie intake. And we implement these our activities through a number of innovative approaches, or what we call accelerators in the strategic framework. And one of them, dear friends, is agroecology. And the agroecology principles and elements which have already been alluded to, they provide a template that not only supports the production of nutritious food, but as has already been said, adaptation and mitigation to climate change, the enhancement of biodiversity. And this is because agroecology, by definition, promotes diverse healthy diets by increasing the biodiversity within and between a specific diversity on farm. And such biodiverse production systems include multi-cropping, crop livestock, agroforestry, and so on and so forth. Agroecological production systems prioritize practices that harness ecosystem services, importantly, such as pollination, biological control of pests and diseases, and importantly, also soil health. And this results in better nutrition outcomes. And importantly, agroecology encourages shortened food value chains and consumption of locally produced foods. This also contributes to better nutritional values of the foods that we consume. From a policy perspective, ladies and gentlemen, agroecology advocates for the voices of civil society, as we have seen with the people that are here, because importantly, they represent women, indigenous peoples, and other minorities. So agroecology enables the listening to the voices of these people, this constituency that would ordinarily be marginalized, and they contribute to the discourse on nutrition. Importantly, these groups are also at a higher risk of hunger and malnutrition. There are many national initiatives and policies that successfully enable or even amplify the contribution of agroecology to healthy diets, which I'm sure we will hear about today. But permit me to also talk about some of what we have. You've already alluded to some of them, such as the tape. But ladies and gentlemen, FAO has the FAO Agroecology Knowledge Hub, which provides a centralized platform that brings together scientific evidence, policy frameworks, and best practices. It facilitates the exchange of knowledge, experiences, and therefore provides support to countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, the tools are available, and I must say the time for change is also now. If we want to stand a chance to reverse these dire statistics of perennial failures with efforts to achieve the abolishment of hunger and malnutrition, the time is now. And finally, I look forward to learning from the experiences that will be shared today. And I thank you all once again for the opportunity to contribute to this discourse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Imba, for walking us through and providing us with the landscape. To complement the presentation, we have also requested Dr. Rachel Besner-Kerr from University of
Good morning. My name is Rachel Besner-Kerr, and I'm a professor in the Department of Global Development at Cornell University. And this morning I am talking to you about agroecology as a transformative approach to improve nutrition. Agroecology is a holistic approach to the food system. It is similar to other approaches to sustainable agriculture in some of the principles that you see depicted here, which were identified through a literature assessment by the UN High-Level Panel of Experts, which I had the privilege of serving on. So these include things like recycling of nutrients, water and energy, ensuring soil health, supporting biodiversity, supporting animal health and welfare, and reducing the use of toxic and fossil fuel-based inputs. But agroecology differs from other approaches to sustainable agriculture in that it is considering the whole food system, the social, political, and economic dimensions of the food system, as well as the agronomic and environmental dimensions. So, for example, co-creating knowledge between scientists, food producers, and consumers to ensure a healthy and sustainable food system, ensuring that food systems address social values, important social values, and healthy diets, and building connectivity between the food producers and consumers, as well as ensuring fairness in the food system, not only for food producers, but for consumers, and really ensuring democratization of the food system by making sure that everyone has a say in what kind of food is produced, how it's produced, and how it's distributed, as well as making sure that people who want to grow food have access to land, water, seeds, and other resources. So I participated as part of the UN High-Level Panel of Experts in an assessment of the scientific literature over a 20-year period to see what kind of evidence there was that this approach can improve food security and nutrition. And we reviewed over 11,000 articles, of which we found 56 that were measuring both agroecological practices as well as food security and nutrition outcomes. And the majority of these found evidence of positive outcomes from agroecological practices on food security and nutrition outcomes. With the more complex agroecological systems combining multiple practices, incorporating social and political dimensions of agroecology, these were more likely to have positive food security and nutrition outcomes. Just to give you some examples from my own research about what this looks like. I've done long-term research with smallholder farming communities in Malawi and Tanzania, working with a team of an interdisciplinary team where we've examined the question of whether agroecological methods can be used to improve food security, nutrition, as well as important other outcomes such as well-being and livelihoods. And in these studies, we've done a pre, post, and control intervention design, and farmers have been introduced to agroecological principles and practices, and then have been invited to choose which options they wanted to test. And they've tested a range of different practices, including things like agroforestry and crop diversification, as well as improving soil health and participating in farmer-to-farmer exchanges. And we've also included a focus on nutrition education and on gender issues in both of these sites. And in all of our studies, we have found that agroecological practices, when controlling for other factors that improve food security and nutrition, were significantly improving food security and nutrition outcomes. And in some cases, specific practices such as crop diversity and compost application were strongly positively associated with food security and nutrition outcomes. So for example, in Malawi, working with several thousand farming households, we found that women's dietary diversity was higher for those in an agroecological intervention compared to those who were not. And in Tanzania, we found that children in agroecology households were 1.48 times more likely to have a minimum acceptable diet. And in all of these cases, we also found that gender relations mattered for agroecology impacts. So for example, in Malawi, farmers who discussed farming with their spouse, where there was more equitable decision-making about farming, were 2.4 times more likely to be food secure and have diverse diets. I've recently completed a study in collaboration with colleagues at CIRAD in France and L'Arthez in Senegal, funded by the European Commission Nutrition Research Facility, where we've looked at urban environments. What is the potential for agroecology to improve urban low-income households' nutrition, including diet-related diseases? And in this study, we found that people who purchased from agroecological markets did so largely motivated by improving their health. And in many cases, these households were suffering from diet-related diseases such as diabetes and hypertension. And this was a major motivator for them to purchase agroecological foods. And we found there were some barriers for increasing access and availability of agroecological foods in an urban environment, which could be changed with investment from policymakers around access to land and public procurement and other policies. So in conclusion, there's evidence that agroecology can have significant and positive impacts on nutrition through multiple pathways. And these pathways include improving biodiversity, but also social empowerment, addressing knowledge gaps, and connecting with cultural foodways. There's less research in urban contexts or to address diet-related non-communicable diseases, but there is potential in that area as well. And there's limited research or investment in these pathways to date, with most agriculture nutrition research focused on biofortification or single crop production. Thank you very much for listening.
So thank you to our first two speakers for helping us to set the scene for today's discussion. So I'd now like to introduce the panel that we have sitting with us here and some also joining us online. We will have a short roundtable to hear a number of different perspectives. So I'd first like to welcome Her Excellency Veronica Gomez Ricarte, Deputy Permanent Representative of Ecuador to the UN agencies in Rome. Mr. Raoul Mille, Scientific Counselor, French Permanent Representation to the UN in Rome. Ms. Aminata Shamit Koroma, Director of Food and Nutrition in Sierra Leone, who is currently joining us from the field, so we hope we'll have a good connection. Alessandra Reversi, Program Officer for the Swiss Agency of Development and Cooperation. Betty Malaki, Country Representative of Swiss Aid in Tanzania, who is also joining us online, and Eduardo Corriere, Global Program Coordinator from YPARD, who is here with us in person. So thank you everyone for joining us. But before we move into the panel, we would like to once again bring you all into the discussion. So we'll be doing another Mentimeter for those of you in the room and also everyone online.
All right, so bring out those phones and you will see on your screen the QR code. Flash it on your screen. You have the code 73012772, and we invite you to answer very quickly 3 questions. Without that phone, flash that QR code, and these are the questions. Number 1, what's one word that comes to your mind when you think about what's essential for a healthy diet? Just one word that comes to your mind when it comes to about healthy diets.
Okay, we have words coming in: diversity, affordability, similar, fruits, vegetables, balance, cost, variety. It looks like diversity is really the one that's coming up in everyone's mind, and also affordability, access, nutritional value. Thank you, everyone. It's nice to see that coherence.
Exactly. Second question, so what's the biggest barrier then to ensure a healthy and diverse diet for all? What is the biggest barrier to ensure a healthy, I would say diverse and affordable diet for all?
Cost, price, corporate interests, inequality. So yes, we're looking a lot at, again, the accessibility and affordability of food, economic access, access to markets. Yeah, so very much a focus in on accessibility and affordability, it looks like, is the dominant theme coming out.
And it's speaking of access and affordability, the third question, what is the most convincing entry point for donors and investors to support the transition towards sustainable, healthy, affordable, and nutritious diets?
Oh, this is a harder one. Let's see. Nobody wants to be the first.
We need some skin in the game.
It's all anonymous, everybody. Malnutrition costs money, reduced need, demographic dividend. There are lots of different thoughts coming in. I see health issues about health coming in on healthy future, the 1 to 23 benefit for nutrition, work on food systems, return on investment, human capital, kind of going back to that idea of the return on the investment, sustainable investments, the health side, the importance of populations having access to health, next generation, children, etc. Looks very interesting.
Very interesting. So thanks for crowdsourcing ideas.
Yeah.
That's important, right? So now we'll turn on to our panel. And well, last year was a very, excuse me, busy year in terms of the COPs, from climate to biodiversity to desertification. And earlier this year, Paris hosted the Nutrition for Growth Summit. And at COP16 in Cali, and later on, which was continued in Rome, stakeholders met to formalize and discuss their commitment to secure the necessary resources to ensure that biodiversity is protected and sustainably managed. And 1 month later, as I've said in the N4G summit in Paris, France fostered and hosted the summit and managed to really rally behind for resources to increase the funding that is needed to make sure that Nutrition for Growth target in terms of funding is met. So my question there is then addressed to our representative from the permanent representation of France. Under the circumstances of polycrisis, fan scarcity, and ODA decrease, and knowing that nutrition and healthy diets come from sustainable practices, biodiverse practices such as agroecology, how is France trying to foster policy coherence on food, on nutrition, on biodiversity, and climate? Raoul, 3 minutes.
En français, merci vraiment de l'invitation à participer à ce panel. Alors, en introduction, permettez-moi de souligner qu'on ne peut que se réjouir vraiment de voir l'UN Nutrition, la FAO, le PAM, le FIDA organiser pour la 2e année consécutive cette semaine de nutrition à Rome dans le cadre de la décennie onusienne de la nutrition. Bon, je ne crois pas. Quelques semaines après le N4G à Paris et à l'amont de la 2e conférence des Nations Unies du suivi de la transformation des systèmes alimentaires en Éthiopie en fin juillet. Alors oui, en France, on souhaite concevoir des politiques intégrées en joignant les enjeux de l'alimentation, de la nutrition, du climat, de l'environnement et de la santé. C'est loin d'être aisé et de nombreux plans et stratégies plus spécifiques coexistent. Il faut un vrai débat, une concertation interministérielle, un pilotage politique de haut niveau. Il faut penser cette stratégie dans le contexte législatif préexistant, ainsi que sa mise en œuvre au niveau territorial. Alors, la nouvelle stratégie nationale pour l'alimentation, la nutrition et le climat, prévue par la loi Climat-Résilience de 2021, a été élaborée par plusieurs directions générales des ministères chargés de l'agriculture, de la santé et de l'environnement, coordonnée par le secrétariat général de la planification écologique. Plusieurs institutions d'expertise et de recherche ont aussi contribué. Alors, étant en consultation depuis début avril 2025 auprès des divers organismes et du public, vous pouvez la trouver sur Internet. Elle est structurée en 4 grands axes et je cite « Assurer une gouvernance coordonnée des politiques en lien avec l'alimentation, la santé et l'environnement à toutes les échelles et pour une action au niveau des territoires ». Garantir à tous l'accès à des environnements alimentaires et nutritionnels de qualité et durables, accompagner les comportements et les régimes alimentaires durables favorables à la santé et à l'environnement, développer la recherche, l'expertise et l'évaluation pour une transition des systèmes alimentaires. Alors, ces 4 axes se déclinent en 20 objectifs et 80 actions concrètes avec plusieurs objectifs chiffrés, comme par exemple atteindre 12% de consommation de produits bio en valeur et en moyenne pour l'ensemble de la population ou réduire de 50% le gaspillage alimentaire des ménages d'ici 2030. Alors, pour vous donner envie vraiment de lire cette stratégie, 60 pages, je vous mentionne 2 points innovants comme l'intégration de l'approche Une seule santé, One Health, ainsi que l'objectivisation des critères environnementaux, des cahiers de charges et des labels. Pour la production agricole, le développement des pratiques agroécologiques et plus globalement des systèmes agricoles, inspirés des principes de l'agroécologie, tels que notamment l'agriculture biologique ou les systèmes extensifs, sont identifiés dans cette stratégie comme faisant partie du panier de leviers permettant de réduire les gaz à effet de serre et d'augmenter le stockage de carbone dans les sols et la biomasse, de promouvoir une saine biodiversité et aussi des aliments de qualité pour une bonne santé pour tous. Pour terminer, donc, ces orientations définissent la politique du gouvernement pour une alimentation saine et durable pour tous à l'horizon de 2030. Elles seront déclinées de manière opérationnelle en cohérence aussi avec les objectifs programmatiques européens et internationaux. Européens, les engagements de réduction des gaz à effet de serre d'ici 2030, les orientations du Pacte vert, la vision pour l'agriculture et l'alimentation dévoilée le 19 février dernier, et au niveau international, l'agenda 2030 et les différents objectifs de développement durable interconnectés liés à l'agriculture durable, à la santé, l'environnement et la nutrition. Je vous remercie.
Well, thanks very much for sharing with us what France is doing so far as these linkages are concerned.
Yes, and now we'll hand over to our colleague in Sierra Leone. So I'm glad to see Dr. Koroma has been able to join us. So just to remind that Ms. Aminata Shabat Koroma is Director of Food and Nutrition in Sierra Leone, and she's joining us online. The government of Sierra Leone has understood the power of multi-sectoral collaboration for nutrition. They've put it high on the political agenda, and now sustainable food systems are also increasingly becoming the focus of your country's participation in multiple global initiatives. I would like to ask you in a few minutes to tell us, what is the role of sustainable agricultural practices in ensuring food security and nutrition in Sierra Leone? And can you tell us a little bit about how the partners coordinate to improve diets? Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and greetings from Moreni, Sierra Leone. And thanks for the organizers for this program, for the side event. Sierra Leone, as of now, we are set on a path of transformative agricultural growth, which now has led us to what we call Feed Salon, which prioritizes increased production in stable foods, in nutritious crops, and all of that with the aim of alleviating hunger and malnutrition, which is high in the country. So that transformed us to, we have an initiative, it's a very high level initiative, one of the president's initiatives called Feed Salon. And for Feed Salon, the vision is to boost agricultural productivity. It will fuel inclusive growth, increase local production, and reduce the dependency of food imports, reduce hunger, increase export earning, create jobs, and build resilience. With all of this in Feed Salon, we have 6 pillars with the policies, and all of these are aligned to increase the production, increase food security, increase nutrition security in the country, and banking on mechanization and integration, seed and import system, aggregation, processing and market linkages, agricultural finances, agri-tech, climate smart agriculture, empowering women and youth. And in this empowering women and youth, we want to expand organic cash crop plantation, training farmers on climate smart agriculture, set up the women and youth on agribusiness credit facility. All of this will boost the country's agricultural production, increase food security, make sure food is available, it's affordable and accessible, which will at the end increase the purchasing power and also have food in everybody's household. We need to make sure we eat what we grow. We need to reduce hunger and malnutrition, which is very high in the country. And as now, stunting in the country is 26.2%, and that is very high for us. So what we're doing now for sustainability, especially for coordination, we want all of this entity to be together. We want agriculture, education, Ministry of Health, the private sector. We want the social protection all to be in one entity. So now what we have is the Scaling Up Nutrition and Food System Hub in the Vice President's office. That's the highest coordination body in the Vice President's office before it was separated. We have Scaling Up Nutrition, we have Food System. Now it's all in one. And then it's the Minister of State in the Vice President's office. That's who is the food system convener. So we have all the partners, all the agencies that are concerned, all the ministries in one body coming together to discuss food security and nutrition for the country. And then twice a year, they have a steering committee meeting, which has the heads of agencies, the heads of all the ministerial heads, meeting with the vice presidents to discuss what is going on in this environment. It is such a vibrant place now where you have farmers, you have the farmers group are very vibrant in the country. And we, as Ministry of Health, we talk with agriculture. We know the nutritious crops that we need in the country to improve nutritional status. And this is all collaborated and discussed under one umbrella. We're also now in the First Food Initiative because the major problem for us as nutritionists, our first and foremost food system starts with breastfeeding, and then it's complementary feeding, and then it is the dietary diversity for the population. So with breastfeeding, we're doing very well. Complementary feeding is where we have a major problem. So we have what we're working with UNICEF on the First Food Initiative. We want to empower local food producers to produce locally made complementary foods in the country, which will reduce the cost, the purchasing cost of mothers. Because what is imported into the country, they're very expensive. And sometimes we really don't know what it is because of the aggressive marketing. So if we empower the local producers to produce nutritious complementary food, then we know exactly what our kids 6 to 23 months and above are getting. And that is where we'll start improving the nutritional status in the country. So for us, the multi-sectorial, it is very important for everybody to be on board of the vision, to know what we want and how we want, and also to plan together. Because when you plan together, you will implement better. So when we say transformative, and transformative leading us to Feed Salon, we want a better food system. We want a sustainable food system for the country, which will alleviate hunger, improve nutritious status, and reduce malnutrition in the country.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing those words and the example of Sierra Leone. It's indeed very interesting to hear about how you've been able to pull together so many different partners and placing it at the highest levels of government. So thank you very much, and I'm sure we can touch back in the questions.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. And you've mentioned, Aminata, as well, around the importance of local food products and food sources. And I want to, from Africa, we go to the Latin American continent. I wanted to ask our the representation from Ecuador here in terms of how does Ecuador develop culturally relevant food and nutrition policies and promote food security and healthy diets?
Muchas gracias. Buenos días con todas y todos. Me disculpo por si pierdo la voz durante la presentación. Me gustaría iniciar contándoles un poco de mi país. Mi país, el Ecuador, es un país megadiverso, plurinacional e intercultural. Nuestra Constitución reconoce las comunidades, los pueblos y nacionalidades indígenas, el pueblo afroecuatoriano y el pueblo montubio. Y asimismo reconoce y garantiza derechos colectivos de conformidad con todos los instrumentos internacionales de derechos humanos. Nosotros tenemos 14 nacionalidades y 18 pueblos indígenas, mayoritariamente ubicados en la región de la Sierra y la Amazonía. Los pueblos indígenas son poseedores de culturas, tradiciones y conocimientos fundamentales para preservar la biodiversidad y cuidar el planeta. En nuestra región llevan miles de años transmitiendo de generación en generación saberes ancestrales y formas de vida que conviven en perfecto equilibrio con su entorno, siendo un ejemplo de sostenibilidad y autosuficiencia. Estos conocimientos han aportado al desarrollo de lo que hoy es mi país, un país agroproductor y agroexportador, y también a la preservación de los sistemas alimentarios ancestrales. Y también a la recuperación de productos tradicionales que hoy se reconocen con denominación de origen, como el cacao fino de aroma. En este contexto, el Ministerio de Salud ha desarrollado una serie de herramientas y políticas referentes a la nutrición y la alimentación con pertinencia cultural, promoviendo seguridad alimentaria y una alimentación saludable. Además, este trabajo se realiza en una coordinación interministerial y con la colaboración de organismos internacionales para implementar estrategias basadas en evidencia y con enfoque de derechos. El Ministerio de Salud realiza este trabajo sobre la base de consultas comunitarias, participación social, el desarrollo de material educativo en lenguas originarias, la promoción de salud, consejerías y educación alimentario, nutricional y campañas educativas. Para resaltar, quisiera mencionar que es precisamente este contexto en el cual la organización social es tan importante dentro de las comunidades, que por tanto el trabajo ha sido exitoso en el Ministerio de Salud. Sin esta organización social de las comunidades indígenas no sería posible realizar este trabajo. La agroecología en este contexto representa un aspecto muy importante en la implementación de las estrategias para alcanzar la seguridad alimentaria y la sostenibilidad ambiental. En el Ecuador se aplican distintas formas de agricultura, incluyendo las ancestrales, que fomentan una producción diversificada y sostenible, que revaloriza los saberes ancestrales y nos ha permitido también desarrollar una alimentación cultural saludable y culturalmente apropiada en muchas zonas del país, en donde además se ha logrado erradicar la desnutrición infantil. Estas prácticas agrícolas han ido de la mano con campañas nutricionales basadas en productos locales y no procesados, donde el Ministerio de Salud trabaja de la mano con el Ministerio de Agricultura en programas de huertos comunitarios y escolares. Me gustaría mencionar dos políticas que han sido particularmente exitosas. El etiquetado nutricional, del cual pueden ustedes conocer un poco más el día viernes en el evento del GRULAC, y las guías alimentarias basadas en alimentos del Ecuador, es decir, en alimentos propios, que están adaptadas a la realidad local del país e incorporan principios de sostenibilidad, diversidad cultural y nutrición. Desde luego, estos esfuerzos que ha hecho el país y que han sido exitosos en muchas zonas, también tenemos que mencionar que enfrentamos desafíos importantes en materia de desnutrición crónica infantil en 3 provincias del país, probablemente derivada de la malnutrición por exceso, la publicidad de alimentos ultraprocesados por muchos años, también por una debilidad institucional a lo largo del tiempo, y por los hábitos por el cambio en los hábitos de consumo, por la presión de los mercados, como es el caso de la quinoa, que por muchos años el Ecuador dejó de producir quinoa y por tanto las poblaciones dejaron de consumir quinoa, contribuyendo a esta desnutrición infantil. Por eso quisiera concluir resaltando la importancia de la cooperación internacional para abordar estos desafíos. Y también para poder movilizar financiación adecuada. Y por tanto, también resaltar la necesidad de contar con espacios donde podamos seguir hablando acerca de la importancia de estos temas. Por supuesto, espacios como la Cumbre del Crecimiento que acaba de celebrarse en Francia son fundamentales, pero también los espacios que generan las coaliciones que nos permiten precisamente visibilizar estos desafíos. Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much for underscoring the importance of local and territorial food systems, which is very much anchored on local cultures, social organizations, indigenous peoples, and the importance of really making sure that the international community is also supporting it, and there's a lot of space for cooperation and coalition building.
Okay, with that, we're now going to step back to Africa and talk to our colleague Betty Malaki, country representative for Swiss Aid Tanzania. I hope you can hear us all right, Betty. Welcome. I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit more about the activities that you're carrying out in Tanzania, especially with regards to the transition towards healthy, sustainable, inclusive, biodiverse, and culturally integrated food systems. Thanks so much, Betty. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Betty Malaki, country representative for Swiss Aid in Tanzania. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present in this Rome Nutrition Week. I appreciate the space. I would like to present about Tanzania, what we do, what Swiss Aid is doing in Tanzania, but also I will touch base what we are doing in globally. according to the Tanzania context, we are now African, the second largest main producers with food self-sufficient of 128%. But Swiss Aid, we realize that production alone is not enough. We must also transform the way we grow, distribute, and consume food. As Swiss Aid Tanzania, we believe that the answer lies under agroecology and farmer-led innovation. Swiss Aid is implementing multi-country initiative called Crops for HD, consumption of resilient orphan crops for healthier diet in Tanzania, Chad, Niger, and India. It runs from 2021 to 2031. Actually, we are concluding the first phase in June, and we are starting the new phase in July. Thank you very much to funding from SDC, which has made possible the delivery of this project. The project's goal is to improve food security and nutrition security for smallholder farmers, especially women, by promoting farmers' variety and neglected and underutilized species, which we name in short NUS, through agroecological practices. Actually, NUS is potential for human nutrition, but also for soil health. We focus on crops like bambara beans, finger millet, sesame, amaranth, spider plant, deeply rooted in our tradition and rich in nutrition. These crops help to enhance food and nutrition security, environmental sustainability, genetic diversity, and climate resilience. To achieve this, we use pull-push-pull framework. In the pull component actually is creating consumer demands. We have reached 17 million people globally, but in Tanzania alone, we have reached 12 million people through radio and social media campaign. This demand has spurred to 73 new food products, including 21 products from Tanzania. When I say food product, this means flour, which is used for porridge. We have snacks, we have biscuits of different varieties, which are healthy and nutritious for children. Actually, we also have many to reach 1,000 Tanzania farmers group, which are now organically certified under participatory guarantee system. This for us is a very big achievement because the products are now in the market. On the component of push, this is basically focusing on strengthening farmers' capacity. We have trained 54,000 farmers in agroecology, in which 80,000 are from Tanzania. We have characterized 730 NUS cultivars preserved in 351 seed banks. And we have empowered 4,000 seed guardians with 300 based in Tanzania. When I talk about seed cultivars, this has been done through participatory cultivar selection, which is basically is very gender sensitive. Women are involved in selecting the cultivars because all they have their specifications. In terms of policy, I'm proud to say that Tanzania actually has the National Ecological Organic Agriculture Strategy. The strategy is now in place and we have started the implementation. We are receiving very great support from the country in terms of implementation of the National Ecological Agriculture Strategy. Currently, Tanzania is reviewing the Seed Act policy of 2003 to recognize farmer-managed seed. This for us is very important because as I'm talking now, there's parliamentary session going on and the Seed Act, farmer seed has been an agenda. So I'm happy that the government is taking very serious the issues of farmer-managed seed. We are also embracing technology. We have Matusauti, which is digital platform help to connect the farmers. So farmers are getting timely information. They connect themselves, they share information, but they also share knowledge. This is the transformation toward to the digital technology. That the farmers, they are only their mobile phones and they are able to exchange knowledge. In closing, food security is more than supply. It is about who control the seed, who benefit from the harvest, and what ends up on the plate. Let's build a food system that honor farmer, value diversity, and nourish both people and the planet. Thank you very much. This is in short what Crops for HD does in Tanzania. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Betty, for sharing that with us. It's truly interesting to hear the work that you're doing in Tanzania. With that, I think we'll hand over to our next,
Yeah, no, I think we'll go, we don't have, yeah, okay, we'll go to, turn over to you, Alessandra. As a bilateral donor agency, can you provide some information on the state of play of funding towards nutrition? And according to you, how can we convince donors and investors to support the transition towards healthy and nutritious diets?
Merci beaucoup. Je vais saisir l'opportunité. Je remercie les interprètes de m'exprimer en français, vu que c'est une langue nationale et une langue officielle des Nations Unies. Je voudrais d'abord féliciter et remercier tous les partenaires qui sont ici aujourd'hui. Comme vous avez entendu, on a la chance de soutenir également le projet dont on vient de parler en Tanzanie. Donc, je voulais vous féliciter et vous remercier d'avoir organisé cet événement. Alors, première chose, concernant votre question, est-ce que les investissements aujourd'hui, par exemple en agroécologie, pensent à la nutrition? Je pense honnêtement que les investissements sont encore essentiellement sectoriels, que la plupart des gens qui investissent dans l'agroécologie pensent éventuellement au climat, mais très peu au lien entre l'agroécologie et la nutrition. Ceci dit, je pense que la nutrition est une grande chance pour l'agroécologie, puisqu'elle peut ramener des principes et des concepts un peu agricoles qui concernent une petite partie de la société, les producteurs, à quelque chose de beaucoup plus intime et de beaucoup plus viscéral, qui est la santé humaine. Ça a été dit par la professeure de Cornell, la plupart des gens qui choisissent des produits agroécologiques le font d'abord pour des questions de santé personnelle, leur santé familiale, éventuellement la santé communautaire, avant de penser à la santé environnementale et planétaire. Donc je pense que vraiment la nutrition va permettre à l'agroécologie de retrouver une dimension de l'intime qui est importante dans la prise de décision. D'autre part, je pense que l'agroécologie est aussi une chance pour la nutrition, dans l'autre sens. C'est-à-dire que ça permettrait de sortir la nutrition parfois d'un certain nutritionnisme, d'une obsession sur un certain comptage de calories, sur quelque chose d'un peu technique, et de donner à la nutrition une dimension qui peut-être manque parfois, c'est une dimension de mouvement social et de mouvement et de dynamique et ça a été très fort dans l'agroécologie, c'est de pouvoir justement donner quelque chose, cette dimension de mobilisation plus activiste que peut-être la nutrition n'a pas encore. J'espère que dans les années à venir, on va voir beaucoup plus d'alliances entre les paysans, les consommatrices et les consommateurs et les patients. Finalement, si notre santé est touchée, ça nous met aussi dans une position de demander de la part des autorités, de la part des entreprises, des produits de meilleure qualité. Donc cette alliance, pour essayer de gérer les maladies non transmissibles qui finalement touchent à la fois les producteurs qui sont face à des intrants synthétiques qui parfois causent des maladies également, mais aussi tous ces régimes alimentaires pas assez diversifiés, pas assez nutritifs. Donc je pense que cette dimension-là de l'agroécologie militante, de l'agroécologie mouvement, peut apporter beaucoup aussi au mouvement de la nutrition. Et ça, c'est d'ailleurs une des premières choses qui peut-être va convaincre les gens à investir. J'espère que ce n'est pas la seule, mais vous l'avez mis dans les commentaires. Quand vous avez demandé qu'est-ce qui permettra de motiver les donateurs, vous avez écrit, il y a quelqu'un à la fin qui a mis suing, donc les procès. Alors, la peur est très mauvaise conseillère, on dit en français, mais en réalité, je pense que les États et les entreprises privées doivent commencer à avoir peur des procès. On voit, notamment en France, il y a maintenant un groupement qui veut attaquer l'État et les entreprises pour, par exemple, le mercure dans le thon. Donc, je pense que toutes les dimensions, et ça, c'est pas nécessairement la plus joyeuse des convictions, mais je pense que la peur va convaincre beaucoup d'entreprises d'agir, et les États aussi. Autre chose pour convaincre. D'une part, je pense qu'il faut plus de recherche. Vous l'avez mentionné, finalement, on connaît assez peu les flux financiers et les subventions et comment est-ce que celles-ci influencent à la fois l'agroécologie et la nutrition. Je pense qu'on doit faire beaucoup plus d'études dans les coûts cachés de l'alimentation. Vous l'avez mentionné, True Cost of Food. Et c'est-à-dire faire ce mouvement vers comprendre les coûts sur la santé et sur l'environnement. Là, je reviens au fait que des acteurs nouveaux vont probablement entrer en jeu, et c'est les assurances. Les assurances qui n'ont plus envie de payer, soit pour les dégâts environnementaux, soit pour les dégâts sur notre santé. Donc je pense qu'un des acteurs qu'on devrait beaucoup plus voir et qui devrait beaucoup plus nous convaincre, que ça soit d'un point de vue du financement privé ou du financement public, c'est le secteur de l'assurance et on doit vraiment trouver une dynamique où on se rapproche de la prévention et non plus seulement du soin et de la gestion des problèmes. Il faut, je pense, que nous travaillions sur le fait de calibrer nos réponses. Nous devons calibrer, est-ce que nous allons essayer de convaincre un gouvernement? Est-ce que nous allons essayer de convaincre les individus? Est-ce que nous allons essayer de convaincre les banques et les investisseurs? Et là, il y a un travail qui a commencé à Rome, que j'aimerais vous inviter à rejoindre, par un groupe qui s'appelle AGRI-PDB, donc Agri Public Development Bank, qui est basé à l'IFAD, mais qui est donc un groupe de banques publiques de développement, qui sont en train d'examiner les critères pour les investissements à la fois agroécologiques et les investissements dans la nutrition. Comment est-ce qu'on peut aider les banques à avoir des critères de façon un peu plus claire, peut-être comme le climat a déjà, mais comment est-ce qu'on peut investir et piloter et monitorer et évaluer les investissements dans l'agroécologie et dans la nutrition? Et je vous invite à vous approcher de AgriPDB pour rejoindre cette conversation sur la définition de critères qui vont guider nos investissements, à la fois publics et privés. Une chose encore que j'aimerais vous inviter à examiner ensemble, c'est les opportunités de marché. Et là, je me tourne vers la jeunesse parce que je pense que l'agroécologie offre des emplois. C'est très difficile aujourd'hui de convaincre des jeunes à travailler dans l'agriculture partout dans le monde. On a une population d'agriculteurs vieillissante et je pense que l'agroécologie est une chance de faire un emploi joyeux, différent, nouveau, de créer des produits et de transformer des produits sains et nutritifs. Et je pense que là aussi, la Suisse travaille beaucoup sur l'emploi dual, c'est-à-dire en formation à la fois scolaire et déjà en pratique dans l'emploi. Et je pense que ça, c'est quelque chose sur lequel on doit travailler, c'est de faire clair que l'agroécologie et son service à la nutrition et à des nouveaux produits plus nutritifs et plus sains peut être une opportunité de marché sur l'économie circulaire et sur plein d'autres choses. Donc, voilà les différents axes sur lesquels je pense que nous pouvons travailler ensemble. Et vraiment, je suis contente de voir ce rapprochement entre l'agroécologie et la nutrition. Je pense que c'est une chance pour les deux champs d'action qui se connaissent encore peu. Et nous avons la chance en Suisse que ma section, qui était la section système alimentaire, vient d'être fusionnée avec la section santé. Et c'est une chance de pouvoir travailler justement à cette interface à la fois des systèmes alimentaires et des systèmes de santé pour une meilleure santé humaine et planétaire. Merci.
And why we're having this conversation today between the Agroecology Coalition and the Healthy Diets for Food Systems Coalition. And we've been doing that since, well, FSS 2021. So really thanks for highlighting food is medicine, the hidden cost of food, finance, employment, etc. Thank you.
Okay, with that, last but not least, we'd like to pass over to our final speaker. So I'd like to welcome Eduardo Corriere, who is the Global Program Coordinator from YPART. So Eduardo, as youth representative, can you tell us a bit about the work of YPART and what you are doing what you are undertaking to promote sustainable and healthy diets?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. So first of all, I would like to start by thanking you everybody for joining us and mentioning also that it's a pleasure to be here today with you all today. So at YPART, we're deeply committed to transforming food systems to be not only sustainable and healthy, but also just and inclusive. Our joint efforts focus on empowering young professionals to act as catalysts to this transformation, because we believe that any effort to transforming food systems should and must take into account and take into consideration the key role that young professionals, young leaders play, not only as future leaders, but as present-day change makers. Our work is also grounded in agroecology, which we see as a pathway for sustainable food systems. We're currently involved in a very prestigious EC European Commission, Belgium Development Corporation, and IFAD-funded project, which is called the Global Program for Small-Scale Agroecology Producers and Sustainable Food System Transformation, which is being implemented in 4 different countries, and namely Uganda and Madagascar in Africa, and Ecuador and Costa Rica in Latin America. And this project, of course, has several components. YPART is focusing on subcomponent number 3 with other implementing partners such as GFRAS and Access Agriculture. And this subcomponent is aiming at empowering 10,000 small-scale producers to move and transition towards agroecological practices. And of course, YPART is focusing on the youth component of the project by empowering through our pillars of work, so advocacy, capacity building, and networking. So empowering 20 young professionals throughout the 4 countries who we call agroecology fellows, who are basically contributing to the project by raising awareness through what we call YPART cafes and youth communities of practice, through really informal meetings at a local district level, through which they facilitate knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, but also they strengthen community-led solutions and projects, and of course they promote farmer-to-farmer learning. A recent example that I can mention is our fellows in Madagascar, in the Mahabo district. They brought together farmers, policy experts, policymakers, just to showcase best practices in terms of, for example, compost input or biosolutions or other practices that of course are shared and are common in their local communities. On a global level, and I'm very pleased that our moderators mentioned it, YPART contributed to different policy spaces, key international policy spaces like CBD in Cali, like UNFCCC, UNCCD, and we did that through youth-led policy papers and position papers. And of course, such papers underline the importance and the role of agroecology, but also integrated pest management, nature-based solutions, and regenerative farming as tools for not only climate resilience, but also food sovereignty. Finally, I would like to mention our contribution to UNGO's Global Youth Statement, because YPART is very active and it collaborates and engages with other youth constituencies all the time. So our contribution to their Global Youth Statement basically was underlining the importance of agroecology, not just as a set of practices, but as a holistic framework that connects climate action, biodiversity protection, food sovereignty, and of course, social justice. Another thing that we underlined in our contribution to this Global Youth Statement is just how much we think it's important to support already existing grassroots and youth-led movements and organizations that are actually already implementing agroecological practices, but in a more, let's say, context-specific and socially grounded way, right? So they're not waiting for change, but they're building it, right? And they're building it through youth-led field schools, community composting, seed banks, and of course, farmer-to-farmer learning, training, and much more, right? And this, of course, all of this aligns with our vision, right? Food systems by youth, not only for youth. And I would like to conclude by mentioning that, of course, our approach is about building a new food system from the ground up, which of course is centered in equity, empowers young people. And again, I'm very pleased that our panelists mentioned youth and mentioned actually the word empowering youth, which I think is essential, because youth represent 16% of the global population today, right? So it's really important, in my opinion, and of course YPART's opinion, to have them in the picture, not only as future leaders, but as present day change makers. And of course, when we create the right conditions for youth can take on meaningful roles that shape local food systems in real time. So that's something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. It's great to hear the youth's voice, and I really appreciated your framing of the youth, not just as future leaders, but also as current change makers, and I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. So with that, I'm afraid, as you've all seen, we're running a little bit behind schedule. We would like to take one question, if possible, to at least have a little bit of interaction with those of you online and in the room. And then we will have a quick closing remarks, and we will have to close this session. So thank you for those who are bearing with us a few minutes late. With that, we have one question that's come online that Oliver will present.
Yes, we have one question addressed to Ecuador. This question from Ramani Wijenshina of FAO. The Ministry of Public Health of Ecuador officially endorsed the country's food-based dietary guidelines a few years ago. And he's wondering if you could give some quick information on how these are being used to guide healthy and culturally appropriate diets and foods.
Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Y yo quisiera comenzar diciendo que no soy la experta del Ministerio de Salud, pero tengo conocimiento del tema. Efectivamente, mi país ha endosado todas las guías, también en distintos ámbitos, no solo en la Organización Mundial de la Salud, sino también todo lo que tiene que ver con sistemas alimentarios. Y siempre hemos tratado de incorporar estos principios en el desarrollo de nuestras propias guías alimentarias, que yo mencioné en la intervención, que se refieren las guías alimentarias basadas en alimentos propios del Ecuador. Los principios están incorporados. Quizás la parte especial es que nuestras guías lo que pretenden es promover productos locales específicos, también para recuperar el consumo de productos andinos que en muchos casos se han perdido en el tiempo, o productos amazónicos que incluso ahora se están consumiendo en Europa como productos orgánicos. También debo decir que hay un permanente interés del Ministerio de Salud por actualizar las guías y por seguir incorporando evidencia científica de los distintos organismos internacionales y de los institutos de investigación. Y este momento, además, creo que estamos en un proceso de fortalecimiento institucional. Acaba de posesionarse el gobierno el día sábado y la vicepresidenta va a ser la cabeza de todo el esquema nacional que tiene que ver con alimentación escolar y nutrición. Es decir, hemos elevado el nivel de importancia de la nutrición y de la alimentación escolar precisamente para darle el espacio que necesita. Gracias.
So with that, I'm afraid we're going to have to close the question and answer session. For those of you in the room who have burning questions, I'm sure our colleagues would be happy to have a quick discussion afterwards. I'd like to turn over to our colleague Linda Mahi, who's joining us from the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety from WHO to give us a few closing remarks. Thank you, Lina.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello to all. Well, we come to the close of this rich and inspiring session, and I want to sincerely thank all the speakers here in the room and also online. And your insights have powerfully illustrated the transformative potential of agroecology in shaping healthier, more sustainable food systems. And today's discussion has reaffirmed the deep alignment between the principles and the elements of agroecology and the vision also of the Coalition of Action on Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems, which is hosted by WHO's Department of Nutrition and Food Safety, and the Secretariat is managed together with our friends of FAO and UN Nutrition. At WHO, we are committed to promote healthy diets from sustainable food systems, diets that are both nutritionally adequate, safe, and also culturally appropriate, environmentally respectful, and economically fair. And WHO, together with FAO, co-leads the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition, which has been recently extended up to 2030. And one of the 6 action areas of the Decade of Action on Nutrition is to have sustainable, resilient food systems for healthy diets. And we've heard it already, agroecology offers the holistic framework that addresses the interconnected challenges of nutrition, climate, biodiversity, and equity. And it supports the production of diverse, nutrient-rich foods that are essential for good health. And the Healthy Diet Coalition also recognizes this, but also recognizes the important role of healthy food environments and the role of consumers. And I think that's why the agroecology and the Healthy Diet Coalitions are such a good marriage. And I think we'll have a long-lasting marriage. So, but beyond the technical and political dimensions, today's event has also reminded us of something more fundamental, that access to healthy food is not a privilege, it's a right. The right to food and the right to health are enshrined in international human rights frameworks, and they must guide our actions at every level, from global commitments to local implementation. And countries are making strides, and we heard from France with their national policy, Sierra Leone with having a food security and nutrition and food systems coordinating body, Tanzania promoting of traditional crops, culturally relevant food policies in Ecuador, youth-led advocacy through Yongo, and SDC asking us to be more activists. I couldn't be more happier to say that, and especially saying farmers and patients, they have to come together. Because we need a movement that keeps growing, and we need to build bridges between the sectors, between health and agriculture, between food production and food consumption, between science and practice, between rights and responsibilities, between the different generations, and between Rome, the food hub, and Geneva, the health and human rights hub. So thank you once again to all the speakers, the organizers, the participants, both in the room and online, for your engagement and commitment to make healthy, sustainable diets a reality for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lina, for those words. With that, we're going to have to close today's session. I just wanted to take a moment to thank the speakers who have joined us, both in person and online. We've had a very rich discussion. Also, thank all of you participants who've taken your time and stayed beyond the allotted time to have this discussion with us. Thank WFP and the colleagues who have supported technically this event, and also the translators who've been very indulgent as we've gone over time. So thank you to everyone, and I encourage you all to join the other UN Nutrition events that will be taking place this afternoon, starting at 2 o'clock Rome time, and all throughout the rest of the week. Thanks so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.